It's HBR, and I'm Dave Lawrence, host of All Things Considered. One of my favorite parts of doing this show over the last 15 years is all the cool guests, like the truly inspiring story we got from Richard Marx, our guest in 2018, who shared the super early childhood inspiration based around his parents' work, and in particular, his dad. He had you singing by age 5, so talk about that confidence builder.
My dad was the most brilliant musician I've ever known. He was obviously a great dad. I miss him dearly, but he was a really, really stellar jazz musician turned jingle writer, producer. And this guy that worked for him, he had a small stable of writers that he would farm out certain gigs to, and this young guy, his name was Jim Grady. I remember his name. They wrote a commercial for some kid-oriented product or something, and they needed a little boy to sing this jingle. And this guy, Jim Grady, said to my dad, well, I hear Richard singing around the office and Richard singing around the house, singing monkey songs and stuff, why don't we get Richard to do it? And my dad laughed and said, I never would have thought of it. I think he was also afraid of it seeming like, nepotism, and it was cool, man. I got to get out of school and went down into the studio, and that was it, man. It was like lighting a fuse, and I just never wanted to be anywhere but in a studio or on a stage. That's
a great start. I mean, and at that age, I would think you'd have just a load of confidence that would come from that. How about, I haven't heard how did she play a role in your earliest years in shaping you to love music?
Well, I mean, both of them, they were not instructional when it came to music. Everything that I learned to love about not just music in general, but making music and the idea of creating music just came from watching them, just came from being, from the energy in my house. I was an only child. I'm an only child. And so I had a fair amount of the attention from both of them, but they were also very busy working, and they had very different job descriptions. My mom worked primarily for my father and came and sang in groups and solos on the stuff that he wrote, and she sang, her voice is on a ton of famous commercials from the 60s and 70s and 80s. But my dad, he was the one that was, the night before the session, he's home writing the next day's work, he's arranging it, he's producing it, and I could just see the joy that both of my parents had for their occupations. And I certainly didn't articulate it in my brain at the time. I was a kid, but that kind of thing permeates your consciousness. And I think when kids, if they're aware of what their parents do, I think a lot of times if you ask a kid, they'd probably say, yeah, I watched my dad dreading going to work every day, or I watched my mom hate her job. I grew up with two parents that couldn't wait to go to work. And I remember thinking, no matter what I ended up doing, I wanted that. I wanted to spend my life doing something that I really loved doing. And of course, it just turned out to be the same thing that they did, except in a different way.
With Richard Marx, one of the guests we're grateful for here on HPR and All Things Considered, I'm Dave Lawrence.